The following is an original production of AZPM News.
For Arizona Public Media, I'm Tim Swindle, Professor Emeritus of Planetary Science at the University of Arizona, and this is Arizona Science. Joining me today is Fernando Martinez, a Regents Professor of Pediatrics at the University of Arizona, who led a recent study that showed that a common antibiotic did not help preschool children who had wheezing attacks that looked like asthma that landed them in their emergency room. Welcome, Fernando.
Thank you.
Let's start with the basics of the study you did. How did you actually test this?
Well, what we did is we took 800 children from 11 centers nationally, some of the best pediatric centers, some of the best pediatric hospitals in the country, and we enrolled them while they were at the emergency room with their parents, with the idea that we needed to convince them that it was important to participate in a study in which, in a more or less definitive way, we solved a very old conundrum in pediatrics. That's basically what we did.
And I understand that you actually didn't run the study to its completion because you felt that you had enough data to prove it. So how did you decide when enough is enough?
Well, we don't decide. There's always an independent committee who is seeing the data unblinded. In other words, they know who received what. We don't know. The researchers are completely blinded. There are two products that are identical one to the other. Half of the children get the real thing, and half of the children get just what is called a placebo. So along the way, just to be sure that we don't give antibiotics to a lot of children who don't need it, this committee, which is called the Data Safety Monitoring Board, is looking at the results unblinded, unbeknownst to us. And at a certain point, predefined, we had determined that if there was no possibility for the study to be effective, again, it was not fair to have these children receive more antibiotics, so the study would be stopped. And we stopped the study because that committee decided, rightfully so, that there was no chance that the study was going to be successful.
Why would you expect the drug that you were testing, azithromycin, to work or to not work?
Well, that's a very old story in pediatrics. We have known for many years that these children, 100,000 of them in the United States, in the preschool years before the age of 6, we have known for a long time that viruses cause these illnesses. But every now and then, empirically, in other words, studies that are done with a few children or with a very large number of children have discovered that some of the children also have in their pharynx bacteria that are what we call pathogenic, in other words, that cause disease. And this scares the physicians and the parents and say, well, treat me with an antibiotic, my child, because they have this bacteria. Now, it has been suspected for a long time that these bacteria were there just as passerbys. In other words, the same disease, the same acute illness causes the conditions in the child to harbor these bacteria. But really, we thought that they were not doing anything. But the fact that it was there scared people. And so they were treated with antibiotics, and at this point, as we discovered, overtreated with antibiotics. So we needed to solve this problem because 20% of children were receiving antibiotics with these illnesses that were caused by viruses. So a definitive study was needed. So we divided the population into those who had these pathogenic bacteria that we were talking about before and those who didn't. And both groups were exactly identical to placebo. In other words, there was no difference between being treated with antibiotic and placebo. And this is what we call, at least we hope, a definitive study. With 800 children, with a lot of power to find differences, we found nothing.
Now, is there a problem with prescribing antibiotics if it makes the parents feel better?
It's a huge problem because we are overusing antibiotics. And what happens is that bacteria are not fools. They start getting used to the antibiotics. And they are selected by natural selection, by evolution, to adapt to environments. And so they have been adapting to an environment with antibiotics. They have become resistant to the antibiotics. And increasingly more we're running out of antibiotics. So it was very important to decide that if this was needed or not. And I think we have provided a clear answer. For the child who gets to the emergency room, these 100,000 children who get to the emergency room every year with this condition, it is not necessary to give antibiotics.
Now, you said that you think that it's something viral that's causing most of these. Is there something to treat the viral?
Well, that's the other thing. Unfortunately, we do not have anything to treat the most common virus that causes these illnesses in these preschool children. And that is something called the rhinovirus. And this virus causes the common cold. And everybody knows that apart from, taking Tylenol or whatever, there's nothing to do for it. We just have to wait. And this is the paradoxical thing, the interesting thing. These children get very sick with a very innocuous, quote unquote, virus. Why? Because they're predisposed for that. They have predisposition to develop asthma. Not all of them are going to develop asthma, but many are. So they have something in their genes and in the way they grew up and in what they were exposed or not exposed to up to that time in life that predisposes them to react abnormally to a very common virus. That's what we know now. So what we have to figure out more than treating this virus is what is it that these kids have that predisposes them for illness? And that's what we're doing now.
What are the next steps that you see or that you're working on?
What is it that makes these kids susceptible? What can we do for the kids before they develop the illness that will reinforce their immune system or train, as we say, their immune system to respond appropriately the way all other kids that don't end up in the emergency room respond, which is with a runny nose and a little bit of cough. But they just continue doing their normal life. They're taken to daycare or to preschool or wherever they're going because they don't have this predisposition that these other children have. And we are some way into understanding why, and therefore some way into developing preventive measures so that these children don't develop these illnesses. They become like all other children. I'm not saying that they're not going to have a cold, but that cold is not going to go to their chest.
Are the preventive measures likely to be drugs or environmental things, or
Both.
do you have an idea?
Both. I think it's going to be in part drugs that stimulate the immune system and in part environmental measures. We are overprotective with our children in early life. We don't expose them enough to environmental factors that are the ones that train the immune system. We're born basically almost sterile because we're inside the womb of our mothers. And very fast, when we come out, we need to adapt to this environment that is full of viruses and full of bacteria and full of enemies that we need to train to fight against. But the natural tendency has been to decrease exposure, to not make them exposed, to decrease risk, which is fine. It's correct, but it's also incorrect because it doesn't allow the child to get used to that environment fast enough so that it doesn't react, that it doesn't learn to react inappropriately to the environment. So it's a problem of our relation with the environment in early life.
So in other words, a little bit of stress is good as long as it's not too much.
Absolutely. This is Goldilocks. A little bit is good, a lot is not good. And therefore, we have to expose the children to the right environment. So now we recommend that they go to daycare. We don't say not go to daycare. Yes, they're going to get sick more, but that's going to, we believe, train the immune system in the right direction.
Are some children born more predisposed than others, or is that known yet?
Yes. There are children that are genetically predisposed. And for those children, probably we will have to adapt certain characteristics, and maybe those are going to be the ones in which we're going to need a drug. But the great majority of children historically have not developed illnesses due to this virus, have developed illnesses due to bacteria, and we didn't have antibiotics and they died. Now we have the antibiotics, but they should be used for the right conditions, the ones in which we need the antibiotic.
Well, congratulations on a very good study that I think is very useful for parents. And thank you for coming in and talking with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is Tim Swindle, and you have been listening to Arizona Science. We have been talking with Fernando Martinez, who led a study that demonstrated what doctors have long suspected, that giving an antibiotic to a young child with a wheezing attack doesn't really help. You can hear more of this conversation and others on Arizona Science segments by going to the AZPM podcast at azpm.org.
This has been an original production of AZPM News.